So here we have a picture. This is the great aunt of a personal friend of mine, and I just show you the elegance and beauty with which Lao traditional textiles were used. Laos has a rich and diverse history, and it was that history and diversity both of technique and design that I was able to then innovate with, create with. Now, back to my education. My education was all based on a creative textile design education. So I studied in Norway, I studied in Finland, I worked with some of the greatest textile artists in Europe who saw textile art as an art and also as a craft. So it was this combination that kind of taught me as a young person, 22, 23, 24, that weaving was actually a profession. It was not just a woman's work in a village. It was something that could be elevated to the level of art and profession. So it was that revelation, being a student in Scandinavia in the 1970s, that I realized, oh, I could be a weaver. That's something I could write in a profession line on an immigration form, which is what I continue to do today. So it was a process of discovering weaving and textiles. Passion became profession. But in Laos, of course, many of the ethnic groups practice their own traditions, and they have a very rich and diverse history. Here you have one of the murals from the temples, the Buddhist temples in Laos, where you have a depiction of two deities, and it shows just how important and central weaving is to Lao life. In one, you have a weaver who's working very hard on what would be your right, and on the left, you have one that's sitting back and just enjoying being on display. So I call them the diligent and the decadent weavers. So you have, throughout Lao history, a richness, a culture, a tradition that's embedded in the culture. When I arrived in Laos in 1989, and I had the idea that we would then start working with farmers and weavers and artisans who already had skills, we had to secure a supply of silk. So this meant going to farmers and working with existing silk farmers who were then able to produce the sericulture. Of course, this is just a little sketch of that. We have two kinds of silk in Laos, a white silk and a yellow silk, and both of these indigenous breeds of natural Laotian silk had to be produced by the farmers in order to guarantee a supply of silk for us in Vientiane, which is the capital where I was based. We did this in a workshop in Vientiane, starting from scratch. We built looms, designed the looms based on what a market study told us might be necessary to weave a wide width and a long length, creating recipes. So I imported my pigments from Germany. I also started to work with vegetable dyes, but I had to build an infrastructure in order to be able to then decide what market forces we were going to be able to accept in terms of where our market would go and what our product might be. Here you can see, so we started from scratch, importing pigments, creating colors, every color having a recipe, a chemical recipe, if it wasn't a vegetable dye. So this was years and years and years. We spent the first 5 years actually carrying out a market study, collecting historic textiles, replicating the historic textiles, creating a color base, creating a directory and a menu of historic textiles. It's such an honor to be here in Malaysia and to be in your museum, which pays tribute to the artisans of Malaysia and their traditions and their skills. As you walk around this museum, and it's wonderful to see it on display, that it is honored in your capital because, of course, you have many ethnic groups, you have different kinds of people, and each of those people have a tradition and a vocabulary which is articulated in their textiles. And so this museum is one of the most beautiful museums where you actually pay tribute to the makers of those textiles, how they were made, and which ethnic And it's something that I hope one day we would have in Laos, the National Museum, which paid tribute to the diverse and complex weaving there, which comes from Laos. So congratulations to Malaysia that you have that. It's quite an accomplishment. But color, so it all starts with color. Creating the colors, dyeing the colors, the recipes, whether they're natural, whether they're chemical, whether they're whatever. We happen to use, as I said, pigments which are imported from Germany. They happen to be among the highest quality. They're eco-friendly. They are they resist light, they resist sweat to some extent, as much as any chemical can. So I work with our staff. I worked with the staff in Laos. We have the same staff for 23 years. So you have an accumulation of knowledge and experience in dyeing, in weaving, in design. So it's basically they've had a non-formal education in our studio where they've been able to learn all of these things. As Janet mentioned, I also run a studio in Cambodia, and it is a non-governmental organization. It's primarily disadvantaged and disabled women who survived the Pol Pot regime. And so it's in an extremely remote area of northern Cambodia. And I have for 10 years personally financed and continue to finance, design, and support that studio. We do have some of the things that I'm wearing today from there. So this is all about teaching color theory, navigating the complexities of a traditional society and how color would be used in that society. But based on our market study, a Western market or a Middle Eastern market or a Japanese market might want something different. So you have to be sensitive to that market, but then you have to meet your market requirements. So how to tread that balance? This is Guangchan, one of our oldest employees. As I mentioned, many of our employees have been with us for 23 years. Our first wave came to like Guangchan and 4 or 5 others, and then we have some that have only been with us 18 or 15. So as we grew from 5 weavers, and Guangchan is an original one of those 5 weavers, we have had very little turnover. So we've gone from a family, a teenager who was 19, who's now 42, who learned to weave, stayed with us, got married, built a house, had her children, and now she's in middle age. So we've actually seen a transformation of women who, like that seed that came to me, a professional weaver. They are professional weavers. It's something now they've done for a generation, and they are still weavers. So that has been one of my most important contributions, I think. So Guangchan, winding silk, twisting silk, bobbins. You all know, you're probably all textile aficionados here, that to make anything has a lot of the skill, the time, the dexterity, the preciousness of your hands, and creating, having the silk pass through your hands, whether it's winding or twisting or dyeing or weaving. This is a collection where we produce village-based farms, and then we dye them, and you can see the texture in that. Just color. Color is an essential component to everything I do. Just a little bit about the Laotian loom, which is unique. It has a vertical pedal, and we can create complex pattern with very simple technology. This allows us to pick a pattern and create a brocade. And I know here in Malaysia you have the songket. It's a continuous brocade process. In Laos, one of the techniques we practice is a continuous brocade, but we also practice discontinuous. And the Laotian loom, the vertical pedal, simple technology, a few strings, pieces of bamboo, you can roll it up, you can travel with it to your next village if your village moved or your family, but it allowed a village woman to take with her the essence of her culture, and that was her ability to create her textiles for her family, for the next wedding, for the next funeral, for whatever the traditions were within her society. So it was this very simple technology that allowed the ability to create those complex designs and patterns. This is a picture where you can see see, we're doing a continuous brocade. I've made some very simple modifications of the looms. Our market study in New York and Paris in 1990 informed us that our clients wanted to have wider fabrics, longer length, even tension, and they liked the traditional fabrics, but they wanted them somehow modified, innovated, tweaked for a Western sensibility. And this is Chan, who's so beautifully dressed, and she's traveled all over the world with me, who is an extraordinary weaver. She's been with us since she was maybe 20 years old, and still with us. This is the discontinuous that we practice, which is, it can look like the sonquette if it's in one color, but it's actually very different. And here you can see with a golden supplementary. It's a continuous supplementary weft. Here you can see another. All of the weaving accessories, whether it's the shuttle, the bobbin, every aspect, we create by hand in Laos. Carving the shuttle, the bamboo bobbin. All of it was locally available raw materials that we were able to call upon, natural resources from Laos, that we were able to then, out of necessity, because in the early days when I went to Laos, the borders were not open. There was no bridge. There was no Air Asia. Laos has come very far, very fast. And so initially in Laos, we were self-sufficient. And so the skills, the raw material, the tools, the supplement, the accessories, all needed to be sourced locally. And this shows you a little bit of the shuttle.